could blame Cooper. We could blame Jim Fix. Jim Fix probably had the most popular book probably on the whole jogging thing,
Hmm.
and he's probably responsible for the fact that all the
Yogging?
Jogging. I believe it's jogging, or
jogging.
Do you mean
yaw
yogging?
might be a soft J.
It's a soft J.
Welcome to Reconsider. I'm Bill Hartman. This is the podcast to challenge you to ask better questions, to look beyond traditional models of thinking and arrive at better health and fitness solutions. Reconsider is sponsored by Substance Nutrition. Go to substancenutrition.com. Get your Neuro Coffee, better brain, and Synthesis, better protein, better body. Enter the coupon code RECON, RECON, and get free shipping on all of your orders.
Do you have? I sort of went through the topics list that I had created and put them in order of relevance to the program.
Just throw it out there.
So I think getting in shape, reconsider getting in shape, like
Mm-hmm.
what that even means. And I actually kind of looked into the history of and the like etymology of, I guess. I don't know if etymology is the right word. Like the origin of the whole phrase.
Getting in shape.
Yeah, and there really isn't any. It kind of goes back to like physical culture and fitness for like war and people being fit to serve, like Roman Greek type of.
Like old school gym class where they actually had standards that you had to, like physical standards you had to pass.
Yeah, yeah. And I was
Yeah,
looking
like
into
chin
that
ups
and
and
it's
push ups and sit ups and running and yeah,
right, right. And then there being the whole concept of being in shape or being out of shape.
right.
And then thinking about that. So if we're going to have the format of how we're talking about this episode be like giving everyone a bit of a history lesson and sort of talking about like where this idea sort of comes from
Right.
and what the contemporary understanding, or at least what people think they understand about it, is,
Right.
and then asking people to reconsider based on things that we're going to talk about what might be a more useful way to think about it.
Okay.
So yeah, starting from that perspective, I mean we're basically in the episode.
Yes,
So
we are.
Go back to that.
I'll just put my marker
I
down.
actually kind of figured that as you were talking. I thought it was a really good lead in, actually.
Yeah.
And,
It's
and and I think most folks will like the casual nature of our discussion anyway.
yeah. I hope they enjoy how organic this is and not forced at
Well,
all.
well, yeah, so the whole premise is subjective, right? It's like, what do you perceive as this concept, right? Um,
Yeah.
Fitness. So here's the thing. Here's the thing that I think is incredibly confusing, and this might be a nice little way to start. Is there's no such thing as general fitness.
Sure. I mean that's gonna
Because
be a
it's
misnomer and misunderstanding as well.
absolutely, because fitness is actually very specific because it is fitness to, like, when we think about survival of the fittest, what that is, it's like surviving within a very specific context. And so if we were talking about a human being fit, we have to say fit for whatever it is. There's a very specific context. It has been generalized conceptually, and then it becomes like an aesthetic almost versus being fit for a specific event. So like a marathon runner is very fit to run marathons, and a weightlifter is very fit to lift weights in competition. So those are two extreme representations, but that would be what we would actually mean when we're saying you are fit for something versus just saying fit, and then people have this mental picture of whoever they think is that representation. So maybe it's Thor, from the movies or something like that. They say, wow, he's really fit. They're thinking about a physical representation versus the capacity to do something.
Yeah.
And
I think
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the context, okay, so the whole mental model of understanding how things are context dependent, I think will be very useful for people going into all of the upcoming episodes just because we're going to be saying that a lot. It's going to become
Right.
redundant. And it's like what's the intent of what you're trying to do and then what are you comparing it to? And
Right.
that's sort of what builds the context that people are going to need in order to ask the better questions. But yeah, what you're saying, like the comparatives that people tend to use, and I think where much of the fitness schemas and paradigms come from are like military and fitness tests. And people remember these like the presidential fitness tests and they
Oh, hey,
remember,
I was a
yeah,
rock star in that. Yeah,
yeah,
we had to do that.
everyone,
We
but
had to
like
do.
where thinking about like the history of that and where that came from, and you know, I did a very brief uh, investigation into this myself, and there were like it going back until I mean all the way to like Greek and Roman times, talking about like being fit to serve in the military or the army or whatever the armed forces were back
Right.
then, and that having that whole idea of like being able to do certain physical things, and then that sort of trickling down into the cultures themselves, so that they became more physical cultures.
Right.
And then over time, that sort of shifted into being more the focus being more on like the intellectual side of things, and people getting kind of like soft and not exercising anymore. And then there became that sort of dichotomy for a while, and they sort of changed back over again as you know the I think it was like World War I maybe is when they actually started to have these sort of fitness type of tests to
Right.
screen soldiers and see if they could actually perform these physical abilities. But yeah, I think that that's something that, and this is kind of like us working through how the format of this podcast is going to go, anyways, because we'll just have, you know, we'll kind of research on the front end before the podcast even starts, or you know, there might be this might be like a body of knowledge that you might know a lot about because you read a couple history books on physical fitness or gymnastics or whatever. You know, you
Right.
never know.
Yeah. So
Have you read those?
I've actually a couple of things, but they're they're not like deep history,
Yeah, I
right?
remember like some French author. I had read some of his physical fitness stuff, and I think it was from like 1860 or something like
Yeah.
that.
Well, just we can use we can use stuff that's not. I guess it's old relative to the people that are probably going to listen to this. If I said 50 years ago when I was
Yeah,
in first grade, right? We had standards. We actually had gym class. Like you had to wear the official gym class t-shirt and shorts and shoes. And you had standards, and like the boys had certain physical standards that they had to pass, and the girls had actual physical standards that they had to execute. And it was this broad scope of it was truly physical education at that point. It wasn't just, hey, let's go play a pickup game of basketball and get a little bit of exercise to burn up some energy so you're not like going crazy during class. It was literally like these were physical standards. Here's the unfortunate circumstance: as that has been sacrificed, I think it probably has affected the intellectual capabilities of many students because of the benefits that are associated with that physical exercise. Like it makes you smarter, like it gives you
yeah,
the capacity to learn better. And that's just the side note. I think probably where we need to go though, is start to lay down this foundation of the fit for what kind of a concept.
sure,
I think this is the probably the number one mistake. And then the easiest thing to pick on is running, because somewhere along the lines in the 1970s, and we can blame whoever we want to with that. We could blame Cooper. We could blame Jim Fix. Jim Fix probably had the most popular book probably on the whole jogging thing. And he's probably responsible for the fact that all these
yogging.
I believe it's jogging.
jogging.
Do you mean
Yaw
yogging?
might be a soft J.
It's a soft J.
Is it a soft J? See, I did not know that. But no, it's like it spawned industry after industry that's associated with exercise. But
Sure.
but because of that, because of it, it was like one of the first things probably aside from like the some of the movement based things like yoga, which was kind of just an odd kind of a representation that I was familiar with growing up, and now it has become, anything that is packageable and now is marketable is now sold as its own separate entity. But the running thing is probably where we gotta sort of nip the bud, so to speak,
Yeah.
is
Well,
we
I
just
also think that the foundations of that come from physical fitness and military sort of
yeah,
training as well. And then
right.
it's, people see it as like, well, you have to be able to run 5 miles in X amount of time to be a Marine or whatever it might be. I don't want to like say that I'm quoting anything specifically, but there's that, and then there's the whole idea of like running as a competitive thing and recreationally as a sport. And you think like, who are, when people try to consider fitness and what's in shape nowadays, you're thinking of more of your like fitness influencers who are taking performance enhancing drugs that all look like completely yoked out of their minds. And
Yeah,
I think before then, like when I was younger in like the '90s, it was more, fitness was more of like the, who was running marathons, who was able to run 5Ks, who was like running all of the time, and there was more like this aerobic emphasis to it. And I think now the progression and evolution is more of a like, how do you look, which
yeah.
really
Like I
makes
said,
more
it's the
sense in
aesthetic
terms
that's
of
that's been creating the interference.
like the word shape. When we think about like getting in shape, like shape is a form and a
Right,
structure.
right.
What how something looks seems to be such an important part of that.
Well,
And I
yeah,
feel
because
like
everybody
that's
wants to
what,
look a certain way.
yeah. And I don't think that what we're going to get to, I think, in terms of what shape really is an understanding that like you don't have to confine yourself to like, you have to be able to run or you have to be able to lift weights and look a certain way. It's more about like, hopefully by the end of this, people will understand that shape is going to be based a lot on like what type of structural archetype you might have as a person,
Right,
and we can
right,
make those concepts a little more simple and tangible for
right.
people.
So let's
Please
consider this. Let's consider like
consider
just
the
a broad
following.
scope of activity. So different sports, different activities. And prior to the aesthetically driven representation being the indicator of fitness, what it was you were specifically participating in a specific type of an activity or sport. Chances are you gravitated towards something that you were good at and you continue to do that. And then there is a physical representation that is the result of participating in that activity. So it's twofold. It's like I have this genetically predisposed um, capability, and then I participate in that activity because I'm really good at it, and so then it becomes fun, and so I do it a lot, and then the byproduct of that is I'm going to look a certain way. And then what we sort of figured out over time is like, oh, I don't have to actually participate in that sport. I can do other things and I can actually look like I participate in that sport, not necessarily having the same capabilities or capacities, but again, I can train or I can exercise in a certain manner and have a specific outcome.
Yeah, and I think that's a good model to understand as well, in a like way of thinking in terms of nature versus nurture. I believe
Right.
is a good way for people to think about it. In that, even if you were to do the exact program that a certain athlete or person would do, that does not necessarily mean that the result will be the same, because that's not how it works. It's not like this direct input output type of. It's not a computer.
Well, I
What?
mean,
I'm a computer.
the phrase that you probably want to, understand, live by, and accept is that you don't get to be anything that you want to be just because you want it bad enough. Like,
Sure.
like all due respect, you have a very specific structure yourself. The chances of you being a 300-pound strong man is probably slim to none.
Yeah, and in that people being force fed this narrative that like, if you work hard and you hustle and you do your best, that you can do
Right.
anything that you want, you can be anything that you want. It's really just not true, and you can become a much better version of what you already are and what
Sure.
capabilities you might already have, and you can really try to amplify those and try to dampen the negative aspects of who you are, but
Yeah.
you're never going to change into like, I could never, no matter how hard I tried, I could never pilot a jet. or fly a spaceship because of my vision. It's just like
Yeah.
I'm disqualified from being
Right.
able to do so.
Right. And
So
that's more easily acceptable for a lot of
sure,
people because of the desire to fit into a group, look like you're part of something,
yeah,
or you find something like again visually appealing, that all you have to do is follow this program and do such and such, and then the social evidence that is presented, what a lot of people either don't realize or refuse to accept is that that is a very small sect of the people that have attempted to follow said program or um, style of activities. And
yeah,
so they only represent the people that were successful, and they say, "Oh, well, I did this, and therefore this is how you should do it." When the reality is like maybe you can't. So
yeah, and
we try many things,
that message you have to take with a grain of salt because they're trying to sell you something,
right?
and they're of course they're going to say that anyone can end up looking like Thor or whoever
Right.
superhero actor, and it's just you can look. The best thing to do is the best advice that I usually end up giving when it comes to aesthetic goals is having people take this sort of overarching look at members of their extended family
Right.
and it's kind of seeing like who are the most fit people in your family. Do they kind of look like you? Like you probably are going to look kind of like them if you work out and you exercise and you train very diligently and
Right.
you have this progress. And the best example would be like if you look at you look at like professional wrestlers and athletes and actors who all look great. Sometimes you can find images of them when they were like 15 and they were just like a skinnier version of their like
Right.
amazing aesthetic self.
Right.
And it's that's just so important to know. And of course, there are outliers, and there are people who are like overweight, and then all of a sudden turned into like this Greek god looking thing. But
Right.
you might also need to understand that that was underneath that the whole time, anyways. Nothing new was built.
Right. And this is one of the big challenges to accept, and people get frustrated or they get angry with themselves because they're giving forth this tremendous effort and yet not seeing this return on investment that is expected based on this representation. And that's not the fault of the representation. It's just the understanding that the individual needs to gain and then accept is that you're just
Yeah,
like the goal is to make a better version of yourself. You can't be anybody else. You can't live anybody else's life. You're just going to have to be what you are. Just be the best version of that based on what your capabilities may be. You do many things, you find out what you're really, really good at, and then you pursue those things because those are
sure.
always going to be the things that are going to have the greatest amount of impact. And
And
then,
that would be what you would call discovery, right?
right. And you every process that you go through in your life is that, right? Like as
It's
much
also
as
an important mental model to know.
right. I mean, it would be great if we could all follow the same path and have the same outcome, but we are not created equal. We are not. We are not born in the same place. We're not born to the same parents. We don't get to make those choices. You get what you get, and then you do the best that you can with that. And the people that can actually accept that tend to be the happiest people. And then they have what they perceive as the greatest of success. And so that's where we got to start. Okay.
Yeah. And I
Um,
think like checking back into like where we are in the progression of this conversation. We already talked about historically where this whole getting in shape fitness idea comes from and what it's sort of turned into these days in terms of like aesthetics
yep,
and it was aerobic and now it's more of like aesthetics so people want to look a certain way
right,
and they're not taking we're asking them to reconsider how this is because they're not taking into consideration the context dependence of this
right,
and what you're getting in shape or being fit to do
right,
and there also we kind of went on a little sidebar there to get people to understand that genetically and they're going to be more predisposed to being good at certain things, and they not are not necessarily no matter how hard they work or what plan that they use or what program that they use. The
right,
reality is they may never look like a certain person
correct.
or do a certain activity, and that's now we can circle back to like getting in shape for what and like
Right.
what that entails.
Okay, can we pick on running?
Sure, I think that's a really good activity to choose, because everyone
Right.
seems to think that running is the way to get in shape
Right.
when it's quite the opposite.
Well, it's again, this is this ill-defined representation of fitness. So you want to be fit to run. You
Yes.
can't you can't just pursue running for fitness, because that is again, it's the opposing representation. It's like, okay, so one of the reasons people get injured early on in their attempts to change themselves, and they pursue a certain activity, one of the reasons they do get injured is because they don't have the physical preparation to do that activity in the first place. And this is like, it's probably been beaten to death as a catchphrase, but it's like you don't run to get fit, you have to get fit to run. And that, but let's take the word run out of that phrase and replace it with anything else. Like
Yeah.
anything that you want to do is like you have to physically prepare yourself progressively to do the end stage activity. So if you want to, I mean, classic example. I live in Indianapolis, and so I think it's the largest mini marathon in the country every May, and I see the same group of people every April who have been preparing for the mini because they run it every year, and so then they go through their little preparation phase, which is like I don't know, it's a 3 month pre-programmed kind of thing, and then they all have the same injury that they had the previous year. So I see the same, like I said, same people every year. They come in, we do the same stuff, they feel great, they finish the mini, then they don't run for a while, and then they come back and then they do the same kind of preparation, when if they would have physically prepared for it over a longer period of time versus trying to compress this fitness into a very small stage, they probably would have been better.
Yeah. And I think so. That's using running as the story and the sort of the analogy that we build all of this off of is really useful, so that people can understand. And we're going to repeat a lot of things as we go through these episodes, but that whole fit to run and not run to get into shape
Yeah.
is really important, because it's really putting, to use another phrase, putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
And you're trying to, you need to sort of understand the structural components that are important and the preparatory components that are important before you try to think about the F word and the functional nature of whatever you're trying to do. Well, because you do have structure and function, and those things are very synonymous with like potential and kinetic energy and these sort of physical rules. So
Right.
the form of something has to be there before it can function the way it's supposed to, or the
Right.
way that it needs to, given the context.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's important.
all of your joints have an excursion that would be necessary to perform the activity in the first place. Do you even have that representation? And
First
then,
question, yeah, very
and
good, like preliminary question.
right, and then there are adaptations within the tissues themselves. So these are your connective tissues. So these are tendons. These people that run understand plantar fascia, like that. It's the thingy on the bottom of your foot, right? You have to have enough force production. So this would be represented for most people as their strength. So they have to be able to produce force repeatedly, right? So can you do it one time, and then can you do it enough times that you don't somehow produce a greater stress than your body can absorb? And again, this is where most people run into a little bit of a pickle, because they don't understand that they're not progressive in their thinking. And this might be why it behooves you to rely on someone that has the experience, the requisite experience, to maybe borrow some of their experience through coaching or whatever you might want to consider. And so this is where you track down the appropriate professionals, and that have
Yeah.
been through this a number of times, and then they can apply experience.
Well, yeah, and interestingly enough, this is going to seem pretty coherent with what we're saying, because the people that you're going to want to search out and find are going to be the people that are asking the questions that we're asking. They're going to want to know when you come to them and you're like, well, I want to get in shape. Can you help me get in shape? A good trainer or therapist is going to ask you about the context, and they're going to say, what are we getting in shape for? And then they're going to they hopefully will be able to lay out the process that they're going to use. That should seem like a reverse engineered version of developing that thing that you want to be good at.
Right. Because the desired outcome is point B, and you don't start with
Yeah.
point B. It's like you have to recognize, okay, if this is where I want to be, where am I now? You have to establish that. And then, as you stated so eloquently, because we use this phrase all the time, we use the reverse engineering concept all the time. So if I want to get to there, it's like, what prerequisites do I need to have in place? What adaptations do I need to have prior to me participating in this activity safely?
Okay. Yep. So that context dependent piece is important. So the way that we are modeling this and sort of offering as a way and a perspective to think about it would be, what are we trying to get in shape for, as being like the first question, and then what's my starting point, and what am I good at to start with. And that can be, you can either know that yourself or someone can help evaluate that, either by like testing joint ranges of motion, or doing fitness type of testing, which also plays back into what we were talking about earlier. They can help guide you towards like what your starting point is, know what your ending point is, and then hopefully with their experience as a coach, trainer, therapist, give you a graded way in order to get from point A to point B,
Right.
using safe to fail experiments, which is another thing that we'll talk about a lot.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yes, because here's the reality. Regardless of how much experience you have, you never really know what the outcome's going to be.
yes.
What the experience provides you is a way to manage the probabilities. So you've had enough exposures that you can say, here's the string of possibilities that I've been exposed to over time. Under most circumstances, with this type of representation, what would be the typical outcome? And then you perform the safe to fail experience. So safe to fail is very important. It's an experiment because we need to see what the outcome is, because this process is going to be emergent, which means that we do something and then we have to see what happens. And then based on what happens, we update our information. So this is Bayesian probability, right? So I update my current representation. I say, okay, what would be the next logical step to take? And this is, just part of a reasoned process that most people either are too anxious to participate in, and they want to bypass everything and they want to get right to point B. And again, that creates the most problems, when if you just go through this strategy over a reasonable amount of time with enough supervision, chances are you're going to avoid a lot of hurt.
Yeah, and it's we won't get too much into it, but that's what like smart goals are, right? Like when you're trying to determine where you want to go
Yeah.
and how reasonable it is within a certain time frame to get there, you have to ask. All of these models are just asking questions in order for you to be able to come up with solutions or ask better questions.
Well, the big question is the algorithm, right? All we're talking about is using this. Okay, if this, then what?
Yeah.
Right. So I have a representation of where I'm starting. If this is my starting conditions, then what would be the first logical thing to do? What needs to be in place before I move forward? Once that is accomplished, and once the adaptation is achieved, then what is the next logical step?
Right. Yeah. So hopefully that helps people understand like where the whole getting in shape and fitness idea thought process comes from.
Right.
What Hopefully we've told the story well enough about how people perceive it now and the perceptions that are out there now, and the common faults and fallacies and mistakes that we see now, and then hopefully we've offered with the last few statements that we've given people a different way to think about it in a more algorithmic way, and something that actually deals with process, because that's how anything is going to be accomplished well, and otherwise you're literally just depending upon luck.
Right. Right. And again, and it comes down to continuously asking the question, right? Where am I relative to where I want to go? And what is the next logical